The sound of gunshots echoed through the dry Montana air as Winifred Lawson dove behind the water tower, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The year was 1885, and she had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to marry a man she'd never met, a man who, as it turned out, was nothing like his letters had promised. Winifred pulled her tattered blue dress tighter around her slender frame, trying to make herself as small as possible behind the wooden structure that provided her only refuge. Tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face as she heard the angry shouts of Jasper Thornton, the man who had paid for her passage west with promises of a good life and gentle companionship. "Come out, you ungrateful woman," Thornton bellowed, his voice slurred from whiskey. "I paid good money for you, and no wife of mine runs away on our wedding day." Winifred squeezed her eyes shut. At 22 years old, she had already endured more hardship than most women twice her age. After losing her parents to influenza and facing destitution in Boston, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed like her only option. The letters from Montana had been so kind, so full of promise. But the moment she stepped off the stagecoach in Silverdale, she knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her blood run cold. Had Thornton found her? She pressed herself tighter against the water tower's weathered wood, praying to become invisible. The hoofbeats slowed, and she heard the creak of leather as someone dismounted. "He's gone back to the saloon, madam. You can come out now." The voice was deep but gentle, nothing like Thornton's harsh bark. Winifred remained frozen in place. "I ain't gonna hurt you," the voice continued, "but you can't stay behind that water tower all night. Temperature drops mighty quick once the sun goes down in these parts." Slowly, Winifred peeked around the edge of the tower. A tall man stood there, silhouetted against the setting sun. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim, a simple shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. "How do I know you're not working for him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man took a step closer, and Winifred could finally make out his features. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' stubble, sun-weathered skin, and the kindest blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Name's Xavier Young, madam. I run the Y-Bar Ranch about 5 miles outside of town. Got no connection to Thornton except that I despise the man." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the temples. "And I don't take kindly to seeing a lady in distress." Winifred hesitated. Every instinct told her to run, but where would she go? She was alone in an unfamiliar town, with no money and no friends. "He paid for my passage," she explained, her voice trembling. "I answered his advertisement back east. His letters were so kind, so gentle, but when I arrived today—" "Thornton's known for his silver tongue and black heart," Xavier said grimly. "You ain't the first mail-order bride he's mistreated, though most don't manage to run away before the wedding. He was drunk when I arrived," Winifred continued, slowly emerging from behind the tower. "He grabbed me, said terrible things about what he expected from a wife. When I objected, he struck me." Her hand unconsciously rose to her cheek, where a bruise was beginning to form. Xavier's jaw tightened as his gaze fell on her injured face. He took a deep breath, then said words that would change Winifred's life forever. "No man will hurt you again. Not while I'm breathing." There was such certainty in his voice that Winifred found herself believing him, despite all the reasons she had to distrust men's promises. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Lawson. Winifred Lawson. Miss Lawson. I need someone to help cook and clean at my ranch. My previous housekeeper left to get married last month. It's honest work with fair pay and your own private room. Most importantly, it's far from Thornton's reach." Winifred studied Xavier's face, looking for any sign of deception. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Xavier's expression softened. "My mother was a mail-order bride. Her first intended turned out to be a cruel man. If not for the kindness of strangers, I wouldn't be standing here today." He extended his hand. "I'm offering you a job, Miss Lawson, not asking for anything else. You have my word." In that moment, Winifred made a decision that would alter the course of her life. She reached out and took Xavier's hand. "Call me Winnie," she said. "Everyone does." As Xavier helped her onto his horse, Winnie glanced back at the water tower that had been her sanctuary and the town of Silverdale that had nearly become her prison. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she felt something akin to hope. The ride to the Y-Bar Ranch was mostly silent. Winnie sat in front of Xavier on his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper. The gentle rhythm of the horse's gait and the warmth of Xavier's presence behind her lulled her into an unexpected sense of security. The Montana sunset painted the vast landscape in hues of gold and crimson, highlighting the rugged beauty of the rolling hills and distant mountains. "Almost there," Xavier said as they crested a rise. Below them stretched a modest but well-maintained ranch. A two-story farmhouse stood proudly among several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and warm light spilled from the windows. "It's beautiful," Winnie breathed, taking in the peaceful scene. "It ain't much compared to what you're probably used to back east," Xavier replied, a hint of pride in his voice nonetheless. "I grew up in a cramped apartment above a tailor's shop," she admitted. "This looks like paradise to me." As they approached the house, the front door swung open and an older woman with silver-streaked hair hurried onto the porch. "Xavier Thomas Young, I was starting to worry. You were supposed to be back before." The woman stopped short when she noticed Winnie. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." Xavier dismounted and helped Winnie down from the horse. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Winifred Lawson. She'll be taking over as our housekeeper, if that's agreeable to you." Mrs. Abernathy's shrewd eyes took in Winnie's disheveled appearance and the bruise on her cheek. Her expression softened immediately. "Well, it's about time. I've been telling Xavier for weeks that I can't keep coming over from my son's place every day to look after things here." She stepped forward and took Winnie's hand. "Come inside, dear. You look like you could use a hot meal and a warm bath." Winnie shot a grateful look at Xavier, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on. Mrs. Abernathy will get you settled. We can discuss the particulars of your employment in the morning." As Winnie followed the older woman inside, she heard Xavier speaking to someone else, a young man who had appeared from the direction of the barn. "Liam, take Copper and give him a good rub-down. Then I need you to ride into town and keep an eye on Thornton. Don't let him see you, just make sure he doesn't get any ideas about coming our way tonight." Liam, who looked to be about 18, nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir. You think he'll cause trouble?" Xavier's voice dropped, but Winnie still caught his response. "I know he will. But I meant what I said to Miss Lawson. No one's going to hurt her again." The interior of the farmhouse was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture and homey touches that spoke of a woman's influence sometime in the past. Mrs. Abernathy led Winnie to a bedroom on the second floor. "This was Xavier's sister's room before she married and moved to Oregon," she explained, lighting a lamp. "She'd want another young woman to have it." The room was small but charming, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath the window. Handmade curtains framed the glass, and a colorful quilt brightened the bed. "Now, let me draw you a bath," Mrs. Abernathy continued, bustling about with an energy that belied her years. "And I'll find you something clean to wear. You look to be about Elizabeth's size." "You're very kind," Winnie said, emotion welling in her throat. "I don't know how I can ever repay nonsense, child," Mrs. Abernathy interrupted gently. "We take care of our own out here, and anyone under Xavier's protection is one of our own." Later, after a hot bath and a hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread, Winnie sat at the kitchen table with Mrs. Abernathy. Xavier had gone to check on the livestock, giving the women time to talk privately. "He's a good man," Mrs. Abernathy said, pouring Winnie another cup of coffee. "One of the best I've known, and I've lived in these parts for 30 years. He said his mother was a mail-order bride," Winnie ventured. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. "Clara, beautiful woman, kind as the day is long. She was supposed to marry a rancher over in Bitterroot Valley, but when she arrived, she found out he already had a wife and was looking for, well, something else entirely." She clucked her tongue disapprovingly. "Thomas Young was working as a ranch hand nearby. He helped Clara escape and brought her here to Silverdale. They fell in love, built this place from nothing." "What happened to them?" Winnie asked, sensing there was more to the story. "Thomas died when Xavier was 15, thrown from a horse during a thunderstorm. Clara passed 3 years later from pneumonia. Xavier was just 18 when he took over running the ranch, with his sister Elizabeth only 16. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes misted with memories. "He could have sold the place, moved somewhere easier. But that boy, well, he's a man now at 28. He's got his father's determination and his mother's heart." The sound of boots on the porch announced Xavier's return. He entered the kitchen, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Everything all right out there, Mrs. Abernathy asked. "Fine as can be," he replied, then turned his gaze to Winnie. "How are you settling in, Miss Lawson? Please call me Winnie," she reminded him. "And I'm grateful for your hospitality. Mrs. Abernathy has been wonderful. And now this old woman needs to get home before my son sends out a search party," Mrs. Abernathy announced, rising from her chair. "Xavier, you'll see me safely to the door," he nodded, understanding her implied request for a private word. As they stepped onto the porch, Winnie could hear their muted conversation through the partially open door. "That girl's been through something terrible, and recently," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Not just today with Thornton." "I figured as much," Xavier replied quietly. "She has that look in her eyes, like a wild horse that's been mistreated. She'll need time to trust again. You be patient with her, you hear?" "Yes, madam." When Xavier returned to the kitchen, Winnie was standing by the window, looking out at the star-filled Montana sky. "It's so clear here," she said. "In Boston, there were too many buildings, too much smoke to see the stars properly." Xavier moved to stand beside her, careful to keep a respectful distance. "That's one of the things I love most about this place. Makes a man feel small and significant all at once." They stood in companionable silence for a moment before Xavier spoke again. "I want to be clear about your position here, Winnie. You'll be paid fair wages for your work. You'll have Sundays off, and any other time you need within reason. Your room is your own, and no one will enter without your permission." Winnie turned to look at him, studying his earnest face. "And if Thornton comes looking for me," Xavier's expression hardened. "Let me worry about Thornton. This is my land, and you're under my protection now." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Why are you doing all this for a stranger?" "Because it's the right thing to do," he answered simply. "And because I know what it's like to feel alone in this world." He hesitated, then added, "My foreman, Hank, will be back from Bozeman tomorrow. He lives in the bunkhouse with Liam and our other ranch hand, Diego. They're good men, but if any of them ever make you uncomfortable in any way, you come straight to me." Winnie nodded, touched by his consideration. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything. Get some rest," he said with a gentle smile. "Tomorrow's a new day." As Winnie climbed the stairs to her new bedroom, she realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of what the next day might bring. Morning came with the crowing of a rooster and the gentle light of dawn filtering through the curtains. For a disorienting moment, Winnie couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. Thornton, the water tower, Xavier. She dressed quickly in the clothes Mrs. Abernathy had provided, a simple calico dress that was a bit loose but clean and well made. After washing her face and pinning up her honey blonde hair, she headed downstairs, determined to earn her keep from her very first day. The kitchen was empty, but the fire in the stove had been lit. A note on the table, written in a strong, masculine hand, caught her attention. Gone to check the north pasture. Coffee in the pot. Help yourself to anything you need. Winnie smiled at the simple consideration. She poured herself a cup of coffee, then set about exploring the kitchen to familiarize herself with its organization. By the time she heard boots on the porch an hour later, she had biscuits in the oven and eggs frying in a pan. Xavier entered, bringing with him the scent of fresh air and horses. He stopped short at the sight of breakfast cooking. "You didn't have to do this," he said, though his appreciative glance at the food belied his words. "I want to be useful," Winnie replied, sliding the eggs onto a plate, "and I've always enjoyed cooking." As they sat down to eat, Xavier asked, "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," she admitted. "It's so quiet here except for the wind. In Boston, there was always noise, carriages, people shouting, factory whistles. Must have been quite a change coming out west." Winnie nodded, her eyes on her plate. "I thought it would be a fresh start. After my parents died, I had few options. I worked as a seamstress, but the pay was barely enough to survive. When I saw Mr. Thornton's advertisement..." She trailed off, ashamed of her naivety. "You made the best decision you could with the information you had," Xavier said firmly. "Thornton is the one who should be ashamed, not you." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Xavier rose, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he instructed quietly. Winnie's heart pounded as she heard the door open, followed by a man's voice she didn't recognize. "Morning, boss. Wanted to let you know I'm back from Bozeman." "Good to see you, Hank," Xavier replied, his posture relaxing. "Come in and meet our new housekeeper." The man who entered the kitchen was in his early 40s, with a weathered face and salt and pepper hair. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Winnie, but he quickly tipped his hat respectfully. "Madam, Hank Miller at your service. I run things around here when the boss is otherwise occupied. Winifred Lawson," she responded with a small smile, "though I prefer Winnie." "Miss Winnie, then," Hank agreed. He turned to Xavier. "Got word in town that Thornton's on the warpath. Seems his bride to be disappeared before the wedding." His meaningful glance at Winnie made it clear he'd put two and two together. Xavier's jaw tightened. "What's he saying?" "That she stole money from him and ran off. He's offering a reward for information." Hank shook his head. "Nobody's believing his story, mind you. We all know Thornton's reputation, but he's got the sheriff's ear on account of his money." "Sheriff Daniels is a reasonable man," Xavier said, though his frown deepened. "I'll ride into town later, have a word with him." "Might want to take the lady with you," Hank suggested. "Let the sheriff see for himself what Thornton did to her face. A man who'd hit a woman before they're even married ain't one to be trusted with a wife." Winnie touched her cheek self-consciously, knowing the bruise must still be visible. "No," Xavier said firmly. "I won't parade Winnie around town like some exhibit. She's been through enough." He turned to her. "Unless you want to go, it's your decision." The consideration in his voice, the way he deferred to her wishes instead of making demands, touched Winnie deeply. "I'd rather not," she admitted. "The thought of seeing him again so soon." Then you'll stay here, Xavier decided. Hank, I want someone at the house at all times until this situation with Thornton is resolved. Can you arrange that with the men? Already planned on it, boss. After breakfast, Xavier prepared to ride into town. Winnie walked him to the porch, wringing her hands anxiously. Please be careful, she said. Mr. Thornton has a violent temper, especially when he's been drinking. Xavier checked his revolver before holstering it. I can handle Thornton. I'm more concerned about you feeling safe here while I'm gone. Hank seems trustworthy, he is. Been with the Y bar since my father's time. Xavier hesitated, then added, Winnie, I need to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly. She tensed, wondering what was coming. Do you have any legal obligation to Thornton? Did you sign any contracts or make any binding promises? Winnie shook her head firmly. No. He paid for my passage, but there was no formal agreement. The minister was waiting when I arrived, but... She shuddered at the memory. I ran before any vows could be spoken. Relief crossed Xavier's face. Good. That means he has no legal claim on you whatsoever. The passage money was a gift, not a debt. That's how courts have ruled in similar cases. He put on his hat. I should be back by midday. If there's any trouble, any at all, Hank knows what to do. As Winnie watched Xavier ride away, she felt a strange mixture of anxiety and peace. Anxiety for his safety, but peace in knowing that, for the first time in a very long while, someone was standing between her and the harshness of the world. The hours passed slowly as Winnie familiarized herself with the house. She dusted the parlor, with its modest but comfortable furnishings, and noted areas that needed deeper cleaning. The house wasn't neglected, but it clearly lacked a woman's touch. Little things like the way Xavier's books were stacked rather than shelved, or how the curtains hadn't been properly rehung after washing spoke of a household managed by a man who had more important things to worry about than domestic details. In Xavier's study, a small room off the parlor, Winnie found herself lingering. A desk sat beneath the window, covered with papers related to ranch business. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with an impressive collection for a ranch house history, poetry, novels, and practical guides to ranching and veterinary care. A daguerreotype in a silver frame caught her eye, a handsome couple with a young boy and girl. Xavier's family, she realized. His mother was beautiful, with the same kind eyes Xavier had inherited. She was something special, Clara Young. Winnie startled at Hank's voice from the doorway. I'm sorry, she apologized quickly. I didn't mean to pry. No need to apologize, Hank said easily. You're here to clean, after all. Just thought you might like to know about the family. He nodded at the photograph. Clara had a way of making everyone feel welcome. This place hasn't been the same since she passed, though Xavier tries his best. How long have you worked for the Young family? Winnie asked, carefully replacing the photograph. Coming on 20 years now. Started as a ranch hand when Thomas was building this place. Stayed on after he died to help the boy. Xavier was just a kid then, trying to keep the ranch going and raise his sister. Hank's weathered face softened with memory. Never seen someone work so hard. Up before dawn to bed after midnight, learning everything he could about cattle and business. Most youngsters would have sold out, but not Xavier. The pride in the foreman's voice was unmistakable. He sounds remarkable, Winnie said quietly. He is. Hank studied her for a moment. You know, Miss Winnie, folks around here respect Xavier more than just about anyone. When he stands up for something or someone, people notice. He tipped his hat and turned to leave. Just thought you might like to know that. By midday, Winnie had prepared a hearty stew for lunch and was kneading dough for bread when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the window, her heart racing when she saw not one rider, but two, Xavier and an older man wearing a sheriff's badge. Hank appeared at her side. "That's Sheriff Daniels. Don't worry, he's a fair man." Still, Winnie couldn't help the fear that surged through her as the men dismounted and approached the house. Had Xavier been arrested? Was the sheriff here to take her back to Thornton? The door opened and Xavier entered first, his expression unreadable. "Winnie, this is Sheriff Daniels. He'd like to ask you a few questions if you're willing." She nodded hesitantly, wiping suddenly damp palms on her apron. Sheriff Daniels removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. His face was stern but not unkind. "Miss Lawson, I apologize for disturbing you. Mr. Young has explained some of the circumstances that brought you here, but I need to hear your account directly." For the next half hour, Winnie recounted her story, the exchange of letters with Thornton, her journey west, and the shocking reality she'd found upon arrival. As she described Thornton's drunken violence and her escape, the sheriff's expression grew increasingly grim. "And that bruise," he said finally, gesturing to her cheek. "That was from Thornton striking you?" "Yes, sir." The sheriff sighed heavily. "Jasper Thornton is a powerful man in Silverdale. Owns the bank, has investments in most of the businesses in town." He glanced at Xavier. "But that doesn't put him above the law. Assault is still assault, even if the victim is a woman he intended to marry." Relief flooded through Winnie. "Then you don't intend to make me go back?" "Absolutely not," Sheriff Daniels said firmly. "No court in Montana territory would force a woman to marry a man who'd already shown violent tendencies toward her. You're free to stay here or go wherever you please." He paused. "That said, Thornton is making quite a fuss. Claims you stole money and jewelry from him." "That's a lie," Winnie said, indignation rising. "I arrived with only my trunk of clothes and personal items. You can search my things if you don't believe me." "That won't be necessary," the sheriff assured her. "Thornton's story doesn't hold water. If you'd stolen valuables, why would you be working as a housekeeper instead of catching the first train east?" Xavier, who had been silent during most of the exchange, finally spoke. "What's your official position on this matter, Sheriff?" "Officially, I see no crime that requires my intervention. Miss Lawson broke no laws by declining to marry Thornton, regardless of what he paid for her passage. As for Thornton's accusation of theft without evidence, it's merely slander." The sheriff put his hat back on. "Unofficially, I'd advise Miss Lawson to stay clear of Silverdale for a while. Thornton's pride is wounded, and men like him can be dangerous when they feel humiliated." After the sheriff departed, Xavier found Winnie in the kitchen, staring out the window with a troubled expression. "Sheriff Daniels is a good man," Xavier said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "He'll make sure Thornton understands there's nothing to be gained by pursuing you further." "Do you really believe that will stop him?" Winnie asked quietly. Xavier sighed. "No, men like Thornton don't give up easily, especially when their pride is involved. But knowing the law isn't on his side will make him think twice about any rash actions." "I'm putting you and your ranch in danger by staying here," Winnie said, turning to face him. "Perhaps I should move on, find employment elsewhere, and go where?" Xavier interrupted more sharply than he'd intended. He softened his tone. "I'm sorry, but Thornton has connections throughout the territory. If you leave, you'll be alone and vulnerable. Here you have protection. I don't want to be a burden. You're not." Xavier set down his coffee cup and took a step closer to her. "Winnie, I promised you that no man would hurt you again. I intend to keep that promise." The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. For a moment, she could almost believe that his concern went beyond mere chivalry or moral obligation. "Besides," he continued with a lighter tone, breaking the moment, "you've already improved things around here considerably. The house hasn't smelled this good in years." A small smile tugged at Winnie's lips. "The bread won't be ready for another hour, I'm afraid." "I'm a patient man," Xavier replied with a warm smile of his own. "Some things are worth waiting for." The days began to settle into a comfortable rhythm at the Y-Bar Ranch. Each morning, Winnie rose early to prepare breakfast for Xavier, and whichever ranch hands were eating at the main house. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, mending clothes, and gradually adding feminine touches to the house: fresh wildflowers in vases, curtains properly hung, furniture rearranged for better conversation. Xavier, for his part, made a point of being considerate without being intrusive. He wiped his boots before entering the house, complimented her cooking, and always asked rather than ordered when he needed something done. In the evenings, they often sat in the parlor, Xavier reading or going over the ranch accounts, Winnie sewing or working on a piece of embroidery she had found in Elizabeth's old trunk, with permission from Xavier, of course. It was during these quiet evenings that they began to truly know each other. Conversation flowed easily between them as they shared stories of their lives. Xavier spoke of growing up on the ranch, the lessons his father had taught him about horses and cattle, his mother's gentle guidance in matters of the heart and mind. Winnie told him about her childhood in Boston, her father's tailor shop, and her mother's dreams that Winnie would marry well and have an easier life than she had. "She would have been heartbroken to know I became a mail-order bride," Winnie admitted one evening, 3 weeks after her arrival at the Y-Bar. "It wasn't the future she imagined for me." "Life rarely gives us the future we imagine," Xavier replied thoughtfully. "My father wanted me to attend university in the East. Had it all planned out, I'd study agriculture and business, then come back to modernize the ranch." "Why didn't you go?" A shadow crossed Xavier's face. "He died before I could. After that, there was no money for university and the ranch needed me here." "You regret it, not having the chance to go?" Xavier considered the question carefully. "I regret not fulfilling my father's wishes for me, but I don't regret the life I've built here. It's a good life, honest work." He glanced around the cozy parlor, then back at Winnie, his gaze lingering. "And it has its compensations." The warmth in his eyes sent a flutter through Winnie's chest. More and more, she found herself noticing things about Xavier: the way the corners of his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands, how his voice deepened when he spoke of things that mattered to him. But along with these new feelings came fear. Trusting a man had led her into Thornton's clutches. Could she risk her heart again so soon? And even if she could, what future could there be with Xavier? She was his employee, dependent on his charity and protection. Any romantic feelings between them would be complicated by that imbalance. Meanwhile, Xavier was battling his own growing attraction to Winnie. He admired her resilience, her quiet strength, and the way she had transformed his house into a home in just a few short weeks. When she smiled, something she did more frequently now, it lit up rooms and his heart in equal measure. But he had promised her safety and respect. Taking advantage of her vulnerable position would make him no better than Thornton, regardless of his intentions. So he kept a careful distance, even as he found himself inventing reasons to be in the house during the day, just to catch glimpses of her working. The tension between them might have continued indefinitely if not for the events of an early autumn day in late September. Xavier had ridden out at dawn with Hank and Diego to move a herd of cattle to lower pastures before the first frost. Only Liam remained behind, tending to chores around the barn and keeping a watchful eye on the house, as Xavier had instructed. Winnie was hanging laundry in the yard, enjoying the crisp air and sunshine, when she heard an approaching horse. Thinking it might be Xavier returning early, she looked up with a smile that quickly died on her lips. Jasper Thornton sat astride a large black stallion, his face flushed with anger or alcohol or both. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and imposing, with a thick mustache and cold eyes that now fixed on Winnie with malevolent intent. "Well, well," he drawled, dismounting. "If it isn't my runaway bride. Playing at being a ranch wife now, are we?" Winnie backed away, her heart hammering. "Mr. Thornton, you should leave. Mr. Young will be back any moment." "Young is 10 miles away with his cattle. I made sure of that before coming here." Thornton advanced on her, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You've caused me a great deal of embarrassment, Winifred. The whole town's been laughing behind my back. A man in my position can't allow that kind of disrespect." "Please," Winnie said, continuing to back toward the house. "Whatever you paid for my passage, I'll work to repay it. Just leave me in peace." Thornton laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. "It's not about the money, though you'll certainly pay that back too. It's about what's mine. I paid for a wife, and I mean to have one." He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing Winnie's arm with bruising force. She screamed, twisting in his grip. "Let her go!" Liam's voice rang out from the direction of the barn. The young ranch hand was running toward them, a pitchfork in his hands, Thornton's face contorted with rage. With his free hand, he drew a revolver from his coat and pointed it at Liam. "Stay back, boy, unless you want to die over some mail-order tramp." "Liam, get help," Winnie shouted, then cried out in pain as Thornton twisted her arm. "Shut your mouth," he snarled. "You're coming with me, and we're going to finish what we started. The minister's still waiting in Silverdale." He began dragging her toward his horse. Liam hesitated, clearly torn between following Winnie's instruction and trying to help her directly. "Go," she urged again, and this time the young man turned and raced for the stables, presumably to get a horse and ride for Xavier. "No one's going to save you this time," Thornton said, lifting Winnie bodily and throwing her onto his horse. "By the time Young gets back, you'll be legally married to me, and there won't be a damn thing he can do about it." As Thornton mounted behind her, Winnie made a desperate decision. She threw herself sideways, falling hard to the ground. Pain shot through her shoulder and hip, but she scrambled to her feet and ran toward the house. If she could get inside, lock the doors. She heard Thornton curse and dismount. His footsteps pounded behind her, gaining quickly. Just as her fingers touched the porch railing, he caught her, spinning her around and striking her across the face with enough force to send her sprawling. "That's twice you've run from me," he growled, standing over her. "There won't be a third time." As Thornton reached down to grab her again, the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the air. "Take another step toward her, and it'll be your last." Xavier's voice was deadly calm as he emerged from around the side of the house, a Winchester rifle aimed squarely at Thornton's chest. Thornton froze, his hand still outstretched. "This isn't your concern, Young. The woman belongs to me." "Winnie doesn't belong to anyone," Xavier replied, his aim unwavering. "Least of all to a man who strikes women." Thornton's hand moved toward his revolver. "I paid good money. Money doesn't buy people in Montana territory," Xavier interrupted. "Now, I'm going to give you one chance to leave peacefully. Drop your gun, get on your horse and ride away. Never come near Winnie or my property again." For a tense moment, Winnie thought Thornton might try to draw his weapon. His face twisted with hatred as he looked from Xavier to her and back again. "This isn't over," he finally spat, but his hand moved away from his revolver. "It is over," Xavier corrected him. "Sheriff Daniels is already on his way here. Seems Liam ran into my men on the road. They've gone to fetch the law while I came back to deal with you personally." His finger tightened slightly on the trigger. "Make your choice, Thornton. Leave now, or face the sheriff with assault charges or worse. depending on what you do in the next few seconds." The threat in Xavier's voice was unmistakable. Thornton must have recognized the deadly intent in the rancher's eyes because he slowly backed toward his horse. "You'll regret this, young," he said, mounting up. "Both of you will." "The only thing I regret," Xavier replied, "is not being here sooner. Now go, before I decide shooting you would save everyone a lot of trouble." With a final venomous glare, Thornton wheeled his horse around and galloped away, disappearing down the road toward Silverdale. The moment he was out of sight, Xavier lowered the rifle and rushed to Winnie's side. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice now soft with concern as he helped her to her feet. "Just bruised, I think," she said, though her cheek throbbed painfully where Thornton had struck her. "Xavier, I was so frightened. If you hadn't come when you did—" "But I did," he interrupted gently, his hand coming up to cup her uninjured cheek. "And I meant what I said, Winnie. No man will ever hurt you again, not while I'm breathing." The tenderness in his touch, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, it was too much. Winnie burst into tears, all the fear and tension of the past hour pouring out of her. Without hesitation, Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she sobbed against his chest. "You're safe now," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe." When her tears finally subsided, Winnie became acutely aware of Xavier's arms around her, the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek, the clean scent of his soap and leather, and something uniquely his own. She should step away, maintain the proper distance between employer and employee, but she couldn't bring herself to move. "Winnie," Xavier said softly, and something in his voice made her look up. What she saw in his eyes took her breath away. Concern, yes, but also something deeper, warmer. "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, the sound of approaching horses interrupted them. Reluctantly, Xavier released her as Sheriff Daniels rode into the yard, followed by Hank and Diego. "Are you both all right?" the sheriff called, dismounting quickly. Liam said Thornton was here, threatening Miss Lawson. "He was," Xavier confirmed, keeping a protective hand at the small of Winnie's back. "But he's gone now. Rode back toward Silverdale after I convinced him it was in his best interest to leave." Sheriff Daniels took in the scene: Winnie's disheveled appearance, the fresh mark on her cheek, the rifle still in Xavier's free hand. "Convinced him how exactly?" "With reasoned argument," Xavier replied evenly. "And the suggestion that you were on your way with arrest warrants." The sheriff's mouth twitched beneath his mustache. "I see. Well, his reasoned departure saves me some paperwork, at least." He turned to Winnie. "Miss Lawson, are you willing to file formal charges against Thornton for assault?" Winnie hesitated, fear flashing through her. "Would I have to testify, face him in court?" "Most likely," the sheriff admitted. "Though with the bruises on your face and arm as evidence, plus Mr. Young's testimony, it would be a strong case." "I'll stand with you every step of the way," Xavier assured her. "But it's your decision, Winnie. No one will force you to do anything you don't want to do, not anymore." His words gave her courage. Thornton had already taken so much from her: her peace of mind, her sense of security. She wouldn't let him take her dignity too. "Yes," she said firmly, "I want to press charges." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Good. I'll ride back to town and draw up the papers. In the meantime, I suggest you both stay alert. Thornton isn't the type to give up easily, especially now that his pride's been wounded twice." After the sheriff left, Xavier insisted on Winnie resting while he and the men secured the ranch. They posted guards, checked all the buildings, and made sure weapons were readily available if needed. When Xavier finally came into the house that evening, he found Winnie in the kitchen, stubbornly preparing dinner despite his instructions that she rest. "You should be lying down," he scolded gently. "I've had enough of lying down," she replied, stirring a pot of stew. Besides, everyone needs to eat, especially after all the excitement today. Xavier watched her for a moment, admiring her resilience. You're a remarkable woman, Winifred Lawson. She glanced up, a flush coloring her cheeks. For cooking dinner, for everything. For your courage today. For not letting Thornton break your spirit. He stepped closer. For turning this house into a home again. The intensity in his voice made her pulse quicken. I should thank you, she said softly. You've done so much for me, asked for so little in return. I didn't do it to earn your gratitude, Winnie. Then why did you do it? Truly, Xavier took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage. At first, it was because it was the right thing to do, because I couldn't stand by and watch someone suffer when I had the power to help. He paused, his gaze holding hers. But now I do it because I can't imagine this place my life without you in it. Winnie's breath caught in her throat. Xavier, I know it's too soon, he continued quickly. You've been through so much, and the last thing I want is to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. You have a home here for as long as you want it, regardless of how you feel about me. The vulnerability in his expression, the careful way he was trying to protect her feelings even as he revealed his own, it moved Winnie deeply. All her fears and doubts seemed to fade in the face of his honest declaration. When I first came here, she began slowly, setting down her spoon and turning to face him fully, I was broken. Not just by what happened with Thornton, but by all the disappointments and losses that led me to become a mail-order bride in the first place. I didn't think I would ever trust a man again. Xavier remained silent, giving her the space to continue. But you've shown me that there are good men in this world, men who keep their promises, men who protect instead of harm. She took a step toward him. I don't know what the future holds, Xavier. I only know that I feel safe with you, not just because you defended me, but because you respect me. You see me as a person, not a possession. You are so much more than just a person to me, Winnie, he said softly, reaching out to take her hand. You're the sunrise after the longest night. You're the spring after a harsh winter. You're everything I never knew I was missing. Tears welled in Winnie's eyes at his words. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Xavier leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss so gentle it was barely more than a whisper. When he started to draw back, Winnie surprised herself by rising on her toes to recapture his lips. This second kiss was still tender, but held the promise of deeper passion, a passion they both silently acknowledged would need time to fully blossom. I'm not asking for promises, Xavier said when they finally parted. I just want the chance to court you properly. To show you every day that not all men are like Thornton. I already know you're nothing like him, Winnie replied with a smile that reached her eyes. And I would be honored to be courted by you, Xavier Young. The following weeks brought significant changes to both Winnie's circumstances and the atmosphere at the Y-Bar Ranch. Sheriff Daniels, true to his word, filed assault charges against Jasper Thornton. To everyone's surprise, Thornton chose to leave the territory rather than face trial. Word came from Bozeman that he had sold his bank and properties in Silverdale and boarded a train east, his reputation in Montana permanently tarnished. Good riddance, was Hank's succinct comment when they received the news. With the threat of Thornton removed, Winnie felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was free, truly free, to build a new life on her own terms. And increasingly, she found that life centering around Xavier and the Y-Bar. Xavier courted her with a thoughtfulness that touched her deeply. He brought her wildflowers from his rides around the ranch, ordered books he thought she might enjoy from the catalog, and arranged for Mrs. Abernathy to stay at the house when he took Winnie on proper outings to town. He was always respectful, never presuming, Yet Winnie could see in his eyes that his feelings for her grew stronger each day, just as hers did for him. Their first official outing together was to a harvest festival in Silverdale in early October. Winnie had been apprehensive about returning to the town where her nightmare with Thornton had begun, but with Xavier at her side, she found herself enjoying the celebrations. The townspeople, far from judging her as she had feared, welcomed her warmly. Many women sought her out specifically to express their admiration for her courage in standing up to Thornton, who had apparently been the town bully for years. "You're something of a local hero," Xavier told her as they walked arm in arm among the festival booths. The woman who finally brought Thornton down. Winnie shook her head, embarrassed by the attention. "I didn't do anything heroic. I just ran away." "Sometimes running is the bravest thing you can do," Xavier replied. "It takes courage to leave a bad situation to start over with nothing but hope." As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch prepared for the cold months ahead. Hay was stored, firewood stacked, and preserves put up. Winnie threw herself into these preparations, learning from Mrs. Abernathy how to manage a ranch household through a Montana winter. "You're a natural at this," the older woman observed one day as they sealed jars of apple butter. "Xavier's mother would have approved of you." The comment warmed Winnie more than she could express. Gradually, she had come to feel that the Y Bar wasn't just a place of refuge for her, but a true home. She loved the rhythms of ranch life, the connections with the land and animals, and most of all, the growing bond with Xavier. In late November, as the first heavy snows blanketed the ranch, Xavier invited Winnie to accompany him on a ride to a special place on the property. Bundled in warm clothes, they set out on horseback one clear, cold morning. Xavier led her to a high ridge overlooking the entire ranch, the house and outbuildings below looking like a child's toy set against the vast white landscape. "My father proposed to my mother on this spot," Xavier said as they dismounted. "It was spring then, with wildflowers everywhere. He told me it was the most beautiful place on the ranch, and the only setting worthy of asking for her hand." Winnie's heart began to race as she realized what might be happening. "It doesn't have the same beauty in winter," Xavier continued, taking her gloved hands in his, "but what I feel for you isn't dependent on seasons or setting." He looked into her eyes with such tenderness it brought tears to her own. "Winifred Lawson, when you hid behind that water tower 3 months ago, I promised that no man would hurt you again. Today, I want to make another promise that I will spend every day of my life trying to bring you joy, security, and love." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a simple but elegant gold ring with a small diamond that caught the winter sunlight. "This was my mother's," he explained. "Winnie, I know we haven't known each other long in terms of time, but I feel I've known your heart for much longer. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled down Winnie's cheeks as emotion overwhelmed her. The journey that had brought her to this moment, all the pain, fear, and uncertainty, suddenly seemed worth every step, for it had led her to Xavier. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Xavier, yes." His face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. Their kiss, witnessed only by the vast Montana sky and the silent mountains, sealed a promise that both knew would last a lifetime. They were married on Christmas Eve in the parlor of the Y Bar ranch house. Sheriff Daniels, who had become a good friend, gave Winnie away. Mrs. Abernathy cried happy tears, declaring that Clara Young would be so pleased to see her son finally settled with a worthy woman. Hank, Diego, and Liam stood proudly as witnesses, the ranch hands having become like family to Winnie. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. As they exchanged vows before the minister, Winnie thought about the strange and winding path that had brought her to this moment. Had someone told her 6 months ago, as she boarded the train in Boston, that she would find true love and happiness in the arms of a Montana rancher, she would have thought them mad. Yet here she was, pledging her life to a man who had shown her the meaning of real love not through grand gestures or pretty words, but through consistent kindness, respect, and protection. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and Xavier's kiss was both a promise and a fulfillment. The small reception that followed was filled with laughter, music, and the warmth of genuine friendship. As the evening progressed, Xavier pulled Winnie aside for a moment of privacy. "I have something for you," he said, leading her to his study. From his desk drawer, he withdrew an official-looking document. "This is the deed to the Y-Bar Ranch. I've had it modified to include your name alongside mine." Winnie stared at him in shock. "Xavier, this isn't necessary. It is to me," he interrupted gently. "This ranch isn't just my home. It's my legacy, my parents' legacy. I want it to be our legacy now, together." He placed the deed in her hands. "Whatever we build here, we build as equals, Winnie. That's my promise to you." Overwhelmed by the significance of his gesture, Winnie could only express her feelings with a kiss that conveyed all the love and gratitude in her heart. Later, as their guests departed and the house grew quiet, Xavier and Winnie stood on the porch, watching snowflakes drift down in the light from the windows. "Happy?" Xavier asked, his arm around her waist. Winnie leaned into him, feeling the solid strength that had become her sanctuary. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. "When I found you behind that water tower," he said softly, "I had no idea I was finding my future." Winnie smiled, remembering the words that had changed her life that day. "No man will hurt you again," you said. "And you've kept that promise in ways I never expected." "And I always will," Xavier vowed, drawing her closer. As they stood together on the threshold of their home and their future, Winnie reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this place. What had begun as desperate flight from danger had transformed into a journey toward love. The mail-order bride who had hidden behind a water tower had found not just safety, but a home, a family, and a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives. When spring came to the Y-Bar Ranch, bringing with it new calves, green grass, and wildflowers dotting the hillsides, Winnie had news of her own. Standing in the kitchen one morning as Xavier prepared to ride out with the men, she placed her hand over her still flat stomach and shared the secret she had been hugging to herself for weeks. "We're going to have a baby," she said, joy radiating from her face. "In the fall, around the time of our first anniversary." Xavier's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Shock gave way to wonder, then to unbridled happiness as he swept her into a careful embrace, as if she had suddenly become fragile, precious china. "A baby," he repeated in awe. "Our baby." His hand joined hers over her stomach, and the look of reverent joy on his face was one Winnie knew she would remember all her days. The news spread quickly through the small ranch community. Mrs. Abernathy immediately began knitting baby clothes, while Hank, Diego, and Liam competed to build the finest cradle the territory had ever seen. Sheriff Daniels, on one of his regular social visits, brought a silver rattle that had belonged to his own children, now grown and gone east. "This ranch has waited too long for the sound of children's laughter," he said, presenting the gift to Winnie. Clara and Thomas would be proud to see their family growing again. As her body changed with the advancing pregnancy, Winnie found herself reflecting often on the twists of fate that had brought her to this happiness. The terrifying day she had hidden behind the water tower now seemed like a distant nightmare still remembered, but no longer holding power over her. One warm evening in late August, as she and Xavier sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson, she gave voice to these thoughts. "You ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, her hand resting on her now prominent belly. "If I hadn't run from Thornton that day, if you hadn't found me when you did." Xavier took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I try not to dwell on what might have been," he admitted, "but I do thank God every day for guiding me to town at exactly the right moment." He smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "Some might call it coincidence. I call it destiny." Winnie leaned against him, feeling their child move within her. "I never believed in destiny before. I thought life was just a series of hardships to be endured." She looked up at him. "You changed that for me, Xavier. You showed me that life can also be a series of joys to be cherished." Their daughter, Clara Elizabeth Young, was born on a crisp October morning with the first light of dawn streaming through the bedroom windows. Mrs. Abernathy served as midwife, her experienced hands guiding the baby into the world while Xavier paced anxiously outside the door, only to be admitted when his daughter's strong cries announced her arrival. The moment Xavier held his daughter, something in him visibly changed, a softening, an opening of his heart that Winnie found beautiful to witness. This strong man, who could handle fractious cattle and stand down armed opponents without flinching, cradled the tiny infant with such gentle reverence that tears sprang to Winnie's eyes. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the baby to Winnie's arms, "just like her mother." "She has your eyes," Winnie noted, tracing a finger along their daughter's delicate cheek. The baby's eyes, already showing signs of the deep blue that characterized Xavier's gaze, blinked solemnly up at her parents. "And your strength," Xavier added. "Did you hear that cry? That's a girl who knows what she wants and isn't afraid to demand it." Winnie laughed softly. "Heaven help us if she has my stubbornness and your determination." "Heaven help the world," Xavier corrected with a proud smile. Life settled into new rhythms with Clara's arrival. The Y-Bar Ranch house, always warm and welcoming under Winnie's care, now truly felt alive with the presence of the baby. Xavier took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything important in his life, never hesitating to walk the floor with a fussy infant or change a diaper when needed, despite the raised eyebrows of some of the ranch hands who considered such tasks women's work. "My father changed diapers too," he informed a startled Liam, who had stumbled upon Xavier performing this duty one day. A real man isn't afraid to care for his children. As Clara grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered alongside her. Xavier's careful management, combined with favorable weather and strong cattle prices, allowed them to expand their operations. They purchased additional land, built a larger barn, and hired more hands. Winnie's role expanded too, as she took on managing the household accounts and correspondence, freeing Xavier to focus on the physical aspects of ranching. Their partnership, in business as in life, became a model that others in the community admired and sought to emulate. When a neighboring rancher fell ill, his wife came to Winnie for advice on how to keep their operation running. When newcomers arrived in the area, Xavier was often the first to offer assistance and guidance on surviving Montana's challenging conditions. The young family's home became a gathering place for the community. Holidays were celebrated with tables groaning under the weight of Winnie's cooking, the house filled with friends and neighbors. Clara, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's golden hair, charmed everyone she met, toddling confidently from guest to guest with a smile that melted even the most weathered cowboy's heart. On Clara's third birthday, as friends gathered to celebrate, Sheriff Daniels, now sporting a fully white beard and planning his retirement, pulled Xavier and Winnie aside. "Got some news you might be interested in," he said, accepting a cup of coffee from Winnie. "Jasper Thornton died last month in Chicago. Apparently drank himself into an early grave." Winnie felt a complex mix of emotions at this news, not satisfaction or joy, but a certain sense of closure. "I hope he found peace," she said finally, surprising herself with the sentiment. Xavier squeezed her hand. "That's why I love you," he said quietly. "Your capacity for forgiveness is remarkable." The sheriff nodded approvingly. "Thought you should know. Closes that chapter for good." And indeed it did. That night, after the guests had departed and Clara was tucked into bed with her new doll, Winnie and Xavier stood on the porch under a sky ablaze with stars, the same porch where, nearly 4 years earlier, he had promised that no man would hurt her again. "I haven't thought about Thornton in a very long time," Winnie admitted. "Sometimes it's hard to remember that frightened woman behind the water tower. She seems like someone else entirely." Xavier wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. She was someone else. She was a woman who hadn't yet discovered her own strength. Winnie turned in his embrace to face him. "I found that strength because of you, because you believed in me before I believed in myself." "No," Xavier corrected gently. "The strength was always yours. I just helped clear the path so you could see it." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch still sending the same thrill through her that it had the first time. "Do you know what I see when I look at you now, Winnie Young?" "What?" she asked, smiling at the love evident in his eyes. "I see the heart of this ranch, the center of our home, the mother of our child and perhaps more children to come." His smile turned mischievous. "I see a woman who no longer needs my protection, but who has my heart completely nonetheless." Winnie rose on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "I may not need your protection anymore," she whispered against his lips, "but I will always need your love." "That," Xavier promised, "you will have for all the days of my life." And as they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Winnie reflected that life's greatest journeys often begin with moments of greatest fear. Her desperate flight to the water tower had been such a moment, a terrifying crossroads that had ultimately led her not to safety, but to love, family, and a happiness deeper and more enduring than she could ever have imagined. The frightened mail-order bride who had hidden behind the water tower had found not just a protector in Xavier Young, but a partner, a lover, and a future filled with promise. And though the memory of that day would always remain with her, it no longer held fear, only gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her home. As the years passed, the Y-Bar Ranch flourished under Xavier and Winnie's stewardship. Clara grew into a confident young girl with her father's love of the land and her mother's compassionate spirit. When she was 5, she welcomed a baby brother, Thomas Hank Young, named for Xavier's father and their loyal foreman who had become like family. Little Thomas proved to be as strong-willed as his sister, though quieter in temperament. By the time he was toddling around the ranch, it was clear he had inherited Xavier's natural way with animals. Horses that shied away from others would stand calmly for Thomas, even as a small child, sensing something in him that they trusted. "He'll be a fine horseman," Xavier predicted proudly, watching his son fearlessly approach a new colt in the corral. "Better than me, I suspect." "As long as he's careful," Winnie cautioned, though she had long since accepted that raising children on a ranch meant embracing a certain amount of risk and adventure. Their family expanded again 3 years later with the arrival of twins Robert Diego and Margaret Abernathy Young, named for friends who had become family over the years. The ranch house, once so quiet when Winnie had first arrived, now rang with children's laughter and the busy sounds of family life. As the children grew, Winnie and Xavier made certain they understood the remarkable journey that had brought their family together. The story of the mail-order bride and the cowboy became a favorite bedtime tale, though carefully edited for younger ears. "Tell us about when you hid behind the water tower, Mama," Clara would beg, even as a teenager who had heard the story countless times. And Winnie would recount how she had come west seeking a new beginning, how circumstances had led her to that desperate moment of hiding, and how a kind cowboy had promised that no man would hurt her again, a promise he had kept through all their years together. "It sounds like a storybook," Margaret said once, her eyes wide with wonder. "The best stories are the ones that really happened," Xavier told her, winking at his wife. When Clara turned 18, the same age Xavier had been when he took over the ranch after his parents' deaths, she announced her intention to attend the university in Bozeman to study agriculture and business. "I want to bring new ideas back to the Y bar," she explained over dinner one evening. "Modern methods that will help us thrive for another generation." Xavier and Winnie exchanged emotional glances, both recognizing the fulfillment of Thomas Young's dream for his son, now being realized through his granddaughter. "Your grandfather would be so proud," Xavier told Clara, his voice thick with feeling. "As are we." The day they took Clara to Bozeman to begin her studies, Winnie found Xavier standing alone on the porch when they returned, looking out over the ranch with an uncharacteristically pensive expression. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" she asked, slipping her arm through his. "Time," he answered. "How quickly it passes. How our frightened girl behind the water tower and the brash young rancher who found her somehow became the parents of a university student." He turned to her, the years having added distinguished lines to his face but none to his character. "I look at you now, Winnie, and I still see that brave young woman who took a chance on a stranger's promise. And I still see the man whose eyes told me I could trust him, even when I'd forgotten how to trust," she replied softly. "We've built a good life, haven't we?" "The best," Xavier agreed, pulling her close. "Better than anything I could have imagined that day in town." As twilight settled over the Y bar, Winnie leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that their story, which had begun with fear and desperation, had transformed into one of enduring love, family, and hope. The mail-order bride who had hidden behind the water tower had found not just safety but a lifetime of happiness with the cowboy who had promised to protect her heart. And as stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Winnie offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her home to this land, this family, and this man whose love had taught her that even the darkest beginnings can lead to the brightest of futures.